you all, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to the No-Till Market Garden Podcast, episode 17, season 2. What a cool episode I have for you this week with Evan Chendar of the Culinary Gardener. Evan is a grower near Asheville, North Carolina, and he operates on a really beautiful piece of property there, growing in this sort of 30-inch bed system. But I didn't call Evan to talk about soil management, not really. Though we do talk a little bit about managing perennial beds and those sorts of things, what I called Evan to talk about was Radicchio forcing, edible flowers, specialty crops, and selling to chefs, because that is what Evan does, and he does it as well as anyone in the business. It is a very cool conversation, and I could not bring it to you without the help of our show sponsors this week, like Farmers Web.
Farmers Web software makes it easier for your farm to manage working with your buyers. By lessening the administrative load and increasing efficiency, Farmers Web helps you save time, reduce errors, and work with more buyers overall. Our free account includes features to manage your real-time and coming-soon product availability, and tools to create your own availability calendar to inform buyers on the seasonality of your products. The free account also includes access to the Farmers Web Guide to Working with Wholesale Buyers, which offers pro tips and best practices on how to work with restaurants, schools, and other similar buyers. A 1-month free trial is available of the paid account, which includes features to manage your customers and orders, give select buyers special pricing and payment terms, track your buyers' payments, send invoices, keep detailed sales records, and much more. You can even manage orders for buyers who don't place them online. Access a demo video and learn more at farmersweb.com.
Also supporting the show today is Dr. Elaine Ingham's Soil Food Web School.
Hello everyone, this is Keisha from the Soil Food Web School. I want to tell you all about the brand new courses that Dr. Elaine Ingham has just launched. She spent the last 4 decades pioneering research on how plants and microbes work together to build healthy soil. Dr. Ingham is considered by many to be the world's foremost soil biologist. She's helped farmers around the world to optimize their soil biology, to reduce their chemical inputs, while simultaneously increasing their yields and profits. I've personally trained with Dr. Ingham, and now I run a successful business making compost and helping farmers to improve the life in their soil. The all-new Soil Food Web Foundation courses are being launched on December 20th, and there's a special introductory offer of $1,600 off for the first 150 students. If you would like to join the soil revolution, then please go to www.soilfoodweb.com today.
Big thank you to our show supporters. Now, let's get nerdy with some specialty crops from Evan Chendar, the Culinary Gardener. Evan Chendar, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm super excited to have you on. Hannah and I got to visit your farm a couple of years ago, and we were just blown away with all the things you have going on there. And I know it's changed a little bit since then. So why don't we just start there? Give us a little rundown of the farm.
Cool. So this is kind of ending its 3rd season on the land that I now own. It started in 2013 on a very small parcel in someone's backyard, and then I moved it to a 4-acre piece of property in 2017, I guess. Yeah. And we're currently cropping a little over an acre, like an acre and a quarter. And we're going to expand a little bit, like another half acre for 2020, and that's going to pretty much max us out. So we'll be at a maximum acreage of like about 1 3/4 acres from then on out. And it's going to give us a lot more opportunity to rotate and to grow more green manures and generate more of our own fertility. That's something that's really important to me that has been hard to make happen. Even after expanding from only 8,000 square feet, I thought definitely, we'll do a lot of cover cropping, and it's just been still a challenge to make that happen. So I'm looking forward to, we have the most cover crop in the ground now than I've ever had in my life. It's like probably, I don't know, a quarter acre or a third of an acre, and it feels really good. Looks really good. I'm looking at it right now. Makes me happy.
Yeah, that's great. That's an interesting thing. I was thinking about this actually earlier this morning. I was moving the sheep, and I looked at our gardens, and I was like, I really just wish half of it could have been in cover crops, for half the season or something.
Yeah.
But when when you're not working with a lot of space, that can be. It's just hard to find the time or the way to get cover crops into the soil.
Well, for me, it's mostly like a cash thing. I have 3 full-time employees and myself, and it's just always we're just always pushing for more production to have more cash flow and hopefully become a little bit more profitable. So that's really what has in the past deterred me from planting more cover crop because we just needed the space for cash crops. And so now, hopefully with this extra land coming into 2020 that I'll feel like we have enough extra space to have a good bit of cover cropping happening throughout the season. If we can have a quarter acre and cover crop throughout the whole season, whole year, that would be fantastic. I would be really happy about that.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a great goal too. In terms of marketing, tell us a little bit about where you're selling your product.
So we market only to restaurants. So everything we grow is sold to restaurants. There's between 10 and 11 restaurants in Asheville, North Carolina that we work with. And then we work with one restaurant in Atlanta that we ship down in a refrigerated truck. We have a local trucking company that goes back and forth to Atlanta a couple times a week, and so we just piggyback on that, and it's pretty inexpensive. It's only like $75 to send down a pallet of produce, and we split the cost with the restaurant, so we're paying like $37.50 or whatever to send down several $100s worth of produce a week. So it's a really good secondary market, I guess, or a great opportunity to expand out of the Asheville region.
Nice, that's cool. Have you been looking to expand in that market?
Into Atlanta?
Yeah.
Not a whole lot because we're kind of maxed out in Asheville for the most part, and like current accounts in Asheville keep on buying more produce as we become more productive. So it hasn't really been a big focus yet, but I'm sure at a certain point we might want to branch out to a couple more restaurants down in Atlanta. I've had some people reach out to me from other restaurants down in Atlanta, curious if they could kind of piggyback on that delivery. So it's possible, but it's not a big focus at the moment, I guess. I'd rather make the accounts that I've been working with in Asheville for several years, rather focus on making them fully satisfied first before picking up new accounts.
Yeah, sure. That's great. In terms of like so you're not doing any farmers market or any retail at all, right?
Correct.
And so how did the sort of focus on restaurants come to be with you?
It was definitely multifaceted. It came from my love of food for ever since I was very young. I cooked professionally before I started farming. That's really my love of food and my love of cooking is what got me into farming to begin with. And when I had the opportunity to kind of take on this small 8,000 square foot plot and do whatever I wanted with it, I figured that the best way that I could compete with significantly larger and well-established farms in the area was to do something completely different, and also to grow high-value crops that would, help me to make closer to a living than if I was growing, the crops that everyone else was growing, and it would also be a way for me to stand out in the market. And also I had somewhat of an idea, I guess, of like what restaurant chefs might be interested in purchasing that they could not access from other farms in the area. So that's kind of how I decided to focus my energies on just growing for restaurants. And it was a slow growing process for sure. I mean, in the beginning, like looking back on it, there's a lot of things that I would never do again back in 2013, 2014, but luckily, there were a few chefs that stuck with me throughout, like kind of some of my blunders or some of my unsuccessful or not really desirable crops, stuff like that. And it helped me to learn a lot and fine tune my kind of crop plan, I guess, which is constantly changing and evolving, but it gave me a little bit more of a focus and understanding of what I should grow and the types of things I should grow and where the demand is for certain things, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. This is something I think we should just go ahead and dive into, because in terms of working with chefs, do you have, like, what is your sort of system for, I guess we should just start at the beginning. Like, what are you doing to get in with a chef, or what did you do to get in with some of these chefs? And I mean, literally, like, how did you get them to even call you back? What was that process like for you?
Mm-hmm. It was really straightforward. I just brought samples into restaurants that I was interested in working with. I think I either called the restaurant or emailed the restaurant to set up like a meeting with the chef. And then I just came in with samples and kind of mostly let the products speak for themselves. And just was like, this is the stuff I'm interested in growing. This is the quality that I'm going to present you with. What do you think? And I picked up like, that it was like I started in, I don't know, December of 2013, and I picked up, I think, 3 accounts, like 3 restaurants that were buying from me. And then it was a, gradual progression from there. I kept, doing that style of samples and meetings and stuff like that. But then at a certain point, like, I guess, my name got around town enough that people already kind of knew what kind of quality they'd be getting from me if they wanted to work with me. So then it was like, I would probably still bring samples, but it was a little bit less important for me to try to sell myself. It was just more like important for me to continue the, level of high quality. And the high quality, I think, is what really took off, helped me in the beginning. It wasn't like, wow, these crops are so unique. It was more like, these look really good. And they taste good and stuff like that. And then, yeah, so once people kind of knew about me, and then when I expanded to the new property, I was able to pick up several accounts that first year. And some of them have become really top accounts for sure.
Yeah, that's cool. And I'm sure that you were bringing them stuff that they probably hadn't seen before. Was that like, or probably didn't see locally at least, was that when you're sort of scouting these restaurants, are you sort of going over their menu and trying to figure out what may fit into theirs, or trying to grow things for them that are already on their menu? Or how does that process work?
Well, in the beginning, it was a little bit of that, but it was also more of like, what time of year is it that I'm reaching out to the restaurant, stuff like that. So, and also like, what am I interested in growing at this moment? Because for me, like, this whole enterprise is like, the number one most important thing is that I'm engaged and I'm excited and interested about everything that we're doing. So it's almost like the priority is that we're growing stuff that I want to be growing, not like what necessarily the market is. That when you have high quality and delicious products, etc., they kind of come together. So now it's like the stuff that I want to grow, and also like within that is like, what do I think people are going to buy? Like, maybe I don't love all the successions of radishes and Hakurei turnips that we plant, but everyone's going to buy them, so it's fine.
Okay, so one thing that we've run into is that it's hard for us to cold call a chef or just build a relationship with a chef and send them a list and say, this is what we have, right? Because I've found that a lot of the chefs that we've worked with really like to be inspired by, like, to see it, like to, pick it up, see it on the market table or whatever it is, and then kind of work with that instead of looking at a list and saying, okay, they have radishes, they have this and that. But bring in your sort of enthusiasm and experience with it, that kind of changes things. Like, do you run into that same thing, and how do you get around it?
I think I'm pretty lucky because at this point, at this point, I haven't picked up a new account in at least a year. Well, actually, that's not true. I picked up a couple new accounts this year, but they were like of restaurants of like chefs that I already worked with. So it was like they already knew who I was and stuff like that. So it was like my reputation was, they were already aware of like my product and my style and all that stuff. But I think also like in Asheville, I'm pretty well known in the restaurant scene. So I don't have to necessarily, I guess like it's not just like some random farmer with their random products. It's like people that want to work with me, I guess they already know what they will be getting from possibly eating at other restaurants in the area or et cetera. I don't know, seeing my products on Instagram or whatnot. So I'm lucky that I don't really have many challenges in that regard, but I think nevertheless, what stands out is quality. I think that's what gets chefs excited is, really delicious and really vibrant, clean, quote unquote perfect, I guess, although I don't really believe in perfection, but for the lack of a better word, that's what gets them excited. So I think, sending a list or an email to a restaurant that you haven't worked with before is a good place to start, but I think people get excited when they see stuff. So I think that's where samples really come in, and I think that's what initially helped me get going, was for people that I wanted to work with to see my product, because it's also a reflection of your style and kind of your style and your personality. I mean, some people, so like chefs, like they want to have like a very high quality product, and that's what gets them excited and inspired to like want to buy your stuff. They are interested in new things, like unique products, but they're also just interested in general quality of more common things as well. And I guess what I was saying was that just like if you're really like there's just certain personalities that I think fit growing stuff like that more than others, and I think that's like where you find the people that have really straight beds and like perfect paths and like very weed free areas, very clean, because it's just a personality type that translates to having beautiful produce that's washed thoroughly and packed beautifully, and the yellow cotyledons are like removed from the radishes or turnips, stuff like that. And I think that kind of sets someone apart from the rest, just with how the produce is presented to a chef when you come in with samples. And I think it's easy for chefs to pick up on that immediately, because generally chefs are also like very particular about how their food is presented. And so it's almost like a connection is made in that moment of a chef seeing something that they like and that looks good before they even taste it. I think that's where you can initially set yourself apart from the majority of other farmers and kind of maybe get your foot in the door. But I think samples are really important as a result of that, basically. And not just sending out a random list and having, no real connection to go off of.
Yeah, that's great. You're presenting it to them like they would want to present something to a customer.
Yeah, it's like when you sit down to eat at a restaurant, you eat with your eyes first. That's like everyone's heard that. And I think people eat with their eyes first when they're buying produce too, whether it's at a farmer's market or, at a restaurant, selling to a restaurant. Anyone who sees something, it's going to taste better no matter what if it looks really great. it's just going to be enhanced. The experience is going to be enhanced as a result. So like we really strive for that in terms of how much we cull things. So there's a lot that doesn't make, there's a lot that doesn't end up going for sale because it doesn't look good, or it detracts from the general uniformity of the rest of the bunch or whatnot. And then it's packed nicely so that when the bin is opened, it's immediately enticing and exciting to who's ever opening it. Like, oh, great, I can't wait to use this product.
Right.
Versus like, oh, good, this product's going to be good after I have someone clean it and remove all these shit leaves, kind of thing.
Right. So in terms of getting them a list, like what is that? Do you have a program for that, or what is your how do you send out lists?
I am really not technologically inclined at all. And I find that a lot of chefs that I work with are not either. Several of them don't even have their own email address. Like they just kind of use the the restaurant's email address. So I just send text messages to people. That's the way that I sell everything, is a text message to the chef with their list for the week. And everyone gets a different list because I grow such a wide variety of different crops, and that none of them are in, most of them are not in massive quantities. And I kind of know who would probably buy X or Y. So I kind of try to push it to those people. And also it's a good way of hedging against not being able to sell out of things. So by growing a wide variety of crops, some of them in really small quantities, it gives me a better opportunity to be able to sell everything by the end of the week. Because with all the diversity of the restaurants that I work with, someone's going to buy, a little bit of someone's going to buy everything, someone's going to buy only 4 things, and then there's going to be the 10 other restaurants in the middle that are buying this or that. And it's a really good way to make sure that everything moves, even though some of these things are really obscure or expensive or whatnot.
Yeah, speaking of obscure and expensive, I mean, I've seen, you've grown so many different things over the years. How, Myoga, ginger, and Crohn's, and all sorts of interesting crops. How are you pricing these? What does that process look like?
Pricing is very challenging, and I don't have an equation for how someone should price certain things. I basically have a rough idea of how, depending on how labor intensive it is to harvest, how much perceived demand the product has, and kind of how rare it is, I guess, or if no one else is growing it and it's really labor intensive and time consuming to pick and clean, then that's going to be a very high priced item. So for the example of Crohn's and Myoga ginger, they're 2 good examples, because Crohn's are very obscure. Very few people grow them. I don't think anyone in Asheville grows them. If they do, they're not selling them to restaurants. They're very labor intensive to pick because they're very small. They take the whole season to grow. And they're also, for some reason, really beloved by chefs. I think because there's just an allure about them, and very few people have even tried them, that they all want to get their hands on them. And they look cool, and they're very mild and pleasant in taste, so they're versatile. And so anyways, we sell those for $25 a pound, and that's a ton of money. I mean, the 100 feet of Crohn's that we have, is anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000 in revenue, which is great because it comes in, at the end of the year and the beginning of, December, January kind of thing. So it's a great opportunity to have a little bit more cash flow. And also we're less busy, so we can take 4 people picking Crohn's for an hour and a half or 2 hours, probably per week. We're picking crones, like 4 people, like 3 hours a week. So that's like 12 man hours picking crones. But we have the time. We're not doing that much else. I have my employees on salary all year round. So it's like I'm not losing money by us spending so much time doing that. I'm not like having to pay them extra or stuff like that. Maybe on some occasions, if we weren't picking crones, I would send them home because we wouldn't have that much else to do. So it works out really well for us, and no one really balked at the price. I think because whether they understand what's involved or not, I guess they're just happy to have their hands on that product. On the other hand, Miyoga ginger we sell for $20 a pound, but that's simply because it's so obscure and rare, and it's super unique. I mean, it's like a unopened flower bud that tastes like young, sweet ginger, but very, very, not very labor intensive at all. Very minimal, hands off. It takes the whole year to grow, but we do nothing to it except give it like a really thick mulch. So it's in that regard, it's the value in that is the fact that I have developed enough space in Miyoga ginger to supply different restaurants with Miyoga ginger, and if they want to buy it for $20 a pound, then they're gonna buy it from me, and it's very popular. It's a delicious kind of fresh taste, and that's where kind of like I'm not sure if the public at a farmer's market would be interested in spending $20 a pound on Miyoga ginger, but restaurants have the ability to insert it into different dishes and make it work out in terms of like food cost, because they can put it in a dish and, put an extra dollar on the dish or something like that, or some other way work out the price of the other items in the dish so that they're still making money on the $20 a pound for the Miyoga that they bought. So that's kind of, I don't know if this model would directly translate to like the general public, but that's also why I grow a lot of these things, because I'm confident that between the dozen accounts that I have, that we'll be able to sell 10 pounds or so of crones a week for like 8 weeks, or a couple pounds of Miyoga ginger. I've yet to like get a really big established Miyoga ginger plot, but it looks like next year we're going to have like 100 feet of it that's well established. So hopefully looking at pretty decent yields for next fall on that.
Hey, you all, quick interruption from me. I am headed to San Diego in February for our no-till intensive with Jared Smith of Jared's Real Food and Stephen Cornett of Nature's Always Right. And I hope to see some of you there. Check out that event at notillgrowers.com/events, and discounts as always to Patreon members who not only get discounts on events and merch. We have some merch. You should go check that out, notillgrowers.com. But at a certain level, get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Dawson Mahalko, J.M. Fortier, Jeffrey Hayes, Kevin Keene, Ryan Gosser, Tiffany Jackson, Weaver Akers, William Henpen, and Yannick LaPlante. Thank you all for your support and the support of this movement. Truly, we cannot do much of anything without that Patreon page, without your support. You can also kick us a few bucks over at Venmo to @NoTillGrowers if you want to do it that way. There are almost 400 people over at that Patreon page that keep this thing going. So we really appreciate that. And the more we grow it, the more we can do with it. So that's patreon.com/FarmerJesse. Anyway, thank you all. Back to Evan. I love the variety of crops you use. And one of the things that you do really well is Radicchio. So I'm hoping that you and I can kind of dive into Radicchio for a little bit and talk about growing Radicchio in the South and doing it consistently, but also blanching and those sorts of things. So maybe we could just, with this, we could start at the beginning and talk about what varieties you've found that kind of work in your system, and then just go from there.
Cool. So I buy most of my Radicchio seed directly from Italy, but which is really great is that Osborne Seeds has started to carry a lot of the varieties from the same seed company in Italy that I buy from. So now there's a easy way for majority of the farmer population that wants to grow these varieties to purchase the seeds from Osborne Seeds. So I'm very excited about that as well. And so with Radicchio, there's a lot of varieties that are basically differentiated by their days to maturity, but they're more or less the same variety. So like Castelfranco or like a Chioggia or a Lucia, they all are going to be generally looking the same, but they're going to be differentiated by if they're extra early, mid, late, or like extra late, or like super extra late. So you can grow a Treviso or a Chioggia that could take, I don't know, maybe 60 days from transplant, or you can grow some that will take twice that amount of time. And generally, the ones that are later have more cold hardiness, but the later ones are generally also trickier to grow, at least for me in my region, because they're more particular about temperature and latitude as well. I found that like a lot of chicories are sensitive to latitude, and if you're not hovering around the latitude of where they're basically from, which is the Veneto region of Italy, some of them just might not work. And I grow some that like just don't work every year, but I'm like, I gotta make this work. And they still don't really work. So I find that the early varieties are way more reliable at developing dense heads that are then going to be marketable, because with Radicchio, if you don't have a dense head, you don't get those beautiful colors. You don't get the blanching of the interior leaves. It's a miss. It's like the texture is tough. There's definitely more fiber. It's not desirable. It's more bitter. So, when we have heads that don't head up, and some of the this late Castelfranco variety called Lucrezia, which Osborne is now carrying, it needs like basically months. It's very late. It's like 120 days or maybe 100 days. And it basically, to trigger it to head up, it needs nights in the 40s without like really deep freezing. So it needs like a prolonged period of like really cool fall weather, which in the southern mountains is really hard to come by because we have such volatile weather. So like the other few days ago, we had like almost 70 degrees, and then 2 nights later, it was 14 degrees. So Lucrezia does not really like that very much. And this year's looks better than last year's, because last year's we basically went straight from summer to winter, and so it had no time to develop a head at all. This year it was a little bit more gradual, so they are starting to develop heads. But this is where forcing really plays a part in saving some of my fall Radicchio crops. Forcing is, just like Belgian endive. It's like you grow out the plant and then you dig it up, root and all, and you grow it out again in another medium, whether it's just water, or it can be damp sand, or damp peat moss, or damp garden soil. You don't necessarily have to have blackout conditions, because unlike Belgian endive, you don't have to cut all the leaves off. So we just leave the whole plant intact, and it kind of creates almost like its own darkness for the heart to then grow. And basically, in forcing, you trigger the plant to use its energy stored in the root with an increase in temperature. You trigger the plant to then take the energy from the root and grow out like a new head. And so with the Lucrezia and also with the pink Radicchio, the Rosalba, those can get saved by forcing them, because forcing will always develop a dense head no matter what. And so what we end up doing is taking all the plants that were not headed up, and it's like December or January, it's not happening. We'll dig them up and we'll get a much smaller head than we would have if they were just successful, but we're able to charge 3.5 times the price because of the extra labor and the extra quality as a result. So that's kind of a way that helps to mitigate some of the burn of, having a few hundred feet of almost, a borderline failure. But that's why I generally have been switching more toward growing earlier selections and medium maturing selections of Radicchio, instead of trying to push some of those late varieties to succeed. And even though some of the earlier varieties are less cold hardy, I've found that, we had 14 degrees the other night and then 20 degrees, and it really didn't get much above freezing for that 24-hour period. Under a layer of Agribon 19, the early Radicchio that I had in the ground was perfectly fine, unscathed. So it still is quite cold hardy, nevertheless, especially if it's covered with row cover.
Right. Okay. So can you take us into detail on what your forcing system is? You mentioned a few different things. Like, do you use a different forcing system depending on what Radicchio you're growing, or is it always the same, or is it based on what beds are available, or how do you do that?
So for all the forcing of Radicchio that we do it all in water as like the medium. We have yet to mess with like sand or peat or anything like that. And we're looking to transition it to the greenhouse, but for the last few years we've been doing it in the barn. And basically what we do is we take a big pallet, jack it up on cinder blocks. We take like black crates that are like perforated. We fill the plants. We dig up the plants. We trim the roots slightly so that they're just not so gnarly and like long roots everywhere, just so it's easier to pack them. And then we pack them into crates and then put them in another kind of bin, a solid bin of a couple inches of water, just so the roots are in water. You do not want to get the crown wet because it's going to rot otherwise. And then we put a heater in there, and then we put PVC hoops and greenhouse plastic. And so it's like basically just a low tunnel with a heater inside. And it takes 3 weeks, and we change the water twice a week. And it's really rudimentary. In the greenhouse, it would basically be the same setup, but without the heater. And that's why we're looking to bring it into the greenhouse, because instead of spending like $80 a month to run like a little like oil heater, like radiator, we can just run off of the heat in the greenhouse, which is going to be roughly the same, temperatures day and night, and we won't have to be having that extra cost. It's definitely not a very efficient setup. My dream is to like have like a forcing shed, which is just devoted to forcing, that has like a lot of insulation and has a heater inside, or maybe even like a stove, depending. And I think that would just be so much more streamlined, because it is a really big pain in the butt to be changing out the water and all that stuff, and pulling out the crates and, getting into the low tunnel and all that sort of thing. But it's worth it. Like I said, with the Crohn's, we have time in the winter to devote to these things, and they're very desirable. I have chefs keep on asking me, like, when's the forced Radicchio coming, like every week? And I'm like, in 2 weeks, like maybe 3. And then like each week they're like, when is it again? And I'm like, you asked me last week, chill out. So anyways, there's a lot of demand for it, and everyone's willing to spend $20 a pound on it because it's just such a delicate and delicious product. It's very mild, hardly bitter at all, no fiber. So it's just pure crunchy juiciness, and it's a little bit sweet, tiny bit bitter, and beautiful. I mean, the colors are, just incredible. When you force a pink chicory, it just becomes like a just pure vibrant fuchsia. And when you force a Castelfranco, it's just either pure white or pure blanched yellow with beautiful pink spots. And when you force the Tardivo, it's just those really long, stark white ribs with the, kind of pure, pale purple. I don't know what color you would call that, but very, very visually appealing and also very delicious as well. So it's definitely not, everyone's thing. You have to kind of have a deep desire to do it, but it's super gratifying when you're pulling them out after 3 weeks and cleaning them up and just looking at them, because it's like, in Italian they're called the winter flower, and it's just so true. I mean, the way the leaves overlap on a Castelfranco is exactly like how a rose grows. So when you open them up slightly, they just look like flower petals. It's so cool. I love it.
I agree. I think the Tardivo in particular, I think, is one of the most beautiful vegetables. Just once you get a good, I've seen the ones that you've done on your Instagram, and they're beautiful. They look like indescribable color. This like cool little sort of finger shape to them. They sort of curl around each other.
Yeah.
What are you doing a lot that are just coming straight out of the field that don't have to be forced?
Of Radicchio?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I mean, what have we done? Probably in the last 2 months, probably, I don't know, maybe 750 to 1,000 pounds of just field grown Radicchio heads. And we still have plenty more of that to be coming out. So yeah, probably maybe, I don't know, 12 to 1,500 pounds of non-forced Radicchio over like a 6-month period.
Cool. And then what is the sort of price difference between your non-forced and your forced, or does it depend on what variety, if it's long season or short season? How does that work?
No, they're all the non-forced Radicchios are priced the same at $6 a pound, and then the forced stuff is $20 a pound. So it's a pretty big price difference. But the goal for us is to be getting heads of Radicchio that are at least a half a pound, and sometimes some of them can be 2 pounds. So when you're getting a 2-pound head of Radicchio and it's $12 per head, and you're spacing them at 10 inches in all directions, that's really profitable. So the goal is to just get them big and dense and heavy, so that at $6 a pound, you're making a large quantity of money per plant, or at least you're making $3 a head, which is, pretty good.
Yeah, that's pretty great. I mean, $6 a pound almost seems kind of low, is for what I would think. Because are there a lot of people doing Radicchio in your area?
Quite a few growers do like ordinary, like Chioggia type Radicchio, but there's not that many people that are doing more of the specialty but non-forced types. Yes, I mean, I think I have this rap that, the culinary gardener is just, everything is just so overpriced. It's so expensive across the board. And a lot of things are really expensive, but then a lot of things are like very also competitively like priced. Like in Whole Foods the other day, I saw like a head of Chioggia Radicchio that was like shriveled and clearly like 3 weeks old for $5 a pound. So this is only $1 more than some crap that you can buy in the supermarket. So it's not like it's not highway robbery, that's for sure. And the goal is just to get the heads big to get the most return per plant.
Yeah, that's awesome. I I think that's a really cool idea, especially when you're selling a lot of high-end items, to have a few that are consistent moneymakers, that also just draw people in, that they're like, well, I can buy this, and then occasionally maybe they can branch out to some of those more expensive items.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This may be a silly question, but I don't know that I've ever seen it. Do you ever do radicchio like cut lettuce? Like, do you ever do like cut radicchio bags or anything like that? Is that a thing?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I think that is a thing. But I think it's maybe, I mean, maybe restaurants will be into it. I think that probably works really well for like farmers market, because it's like, ooh, this nice, beautiful bag of mixed radicchio leaves. Like, so it's kind of just like a salad mix kind of style. But for me, there's not very much, like it, I'm not sure it would be worth the effort to do that for us, and to like spin it and bag it and all that stuff. And also I found that chefs are generally pretty particular with mixes. Like, the people that I work with, for the most part, they don't like having things mixed. If they want to do a mix, they want to do it themselves at like the ratios that they want to use them at. So I don't grow any salad mix. I just grow like lettuce heads, and so with radicchio, it's kind of the same.
Yeah, that's a great point. Does it oxidize easy if you cut it?
It does, actually. Yeah, the cut, where it's cut, will turn brown pretty quickly. And actually, what we do, we don't wash the radicchio, which would help prevent it from oxidizing, because the heads are so dense, it's like impossible to get the water out after that. But what we do is we take a damp paper towel or rag, and we wipe the cut end of each head so that it stays as white as possible and doesn't turn brown. Because just like I was talking about earlier with, like, the presentation and the first impression, if the cut end is brown and it happens overnight, a restaurant chef has no idea that it just happens so quickly. They could think, oh, this stuff's old. This stuff's like a week old. Like, why is it brown on the bottom? So we like to try to avoid that.
Yeah, that's a good little detail. And so one of the things I kind of want to ask you about is we talked about some of these perennials, like the Myoga ginger and the crones. What are you doing? And maybe it's different for everyone, but what are you kind of doing to manage all these perennial beds? Well, I guess how many perennial crops do you have like that? And then how are you sort of managing those beds and keeping them from being, getting too weedy?
We don't have a whole lot of perennials because of that reason. Over the years, I've tried to have more and more perennials, and it's just so hard to keep the weeds under control. We also have a lot of perennial weed pressure here, so that makes it really challenging too. I don't like growing perennials on fabric because it's hard, I find, to keep on generating fertility in the soil. Like, I would want to top dress every year my perennials with like compost and like a thick mulch, but you can't really do that if you're growing them in fabric. So yeah, we've had a lot of perennial failures, and I've kind of dialed my perennials back to what seems to work the best without too much input or labor on our part. But I think it took until this year to really figure out that they just need an incredibly thick layer of mulch, and you need to fork out the perennial weeds. Like, we have a lot of dock, we have a lot of horse nettle.
Oh, that stuff is the worst.
It's crazy. But yeah, I mean, like, we are trying to do asparagus as like a crop that we can sell, and we've managed to get 2 beds under control, but we have 2 beds that we've just ignored all season, and there's like weeds that have flowered, and like they're taller than the asparagus ferns that grew out after the crop. And like, we're going to give that a lot of attention this year, and then give it just an absurdly thick layer of mulch, because these perennials they have so much stored energy in their roots, they can really poke through a thick layer of cover. but the annual weeds can't germinate at that point. And if you get most of the perennial weeds out, or if you're working on getting them out, then you can work on getting those under control. I think that's the answer, but the real answer is I haven't done a really good job of it overall. And but the ones that we do have, besides what we've talked about already, are garlic chives, which we sell a lot of garlic chive flower. And they're also just really early in the spring for an allium, so that's really nice. And we have regular chives too. And we have a few perennial herbs. That at the moment is not quite enough to probably sell like a meaningful amount of, but maybe, in the future when we kind of divide them and get a larger quantity of them. And then we also do some perennials in pots. That makes it pretty easy to manage weeds for sure, and to have a decent fertility. The only effort there is to be repotting them so every so often, or like top dressing them with compost and stuff like that. So we generally have our like non-hardy perennials in pots, and those definitely do the best, obviously. But yeah, perennials I thought initially were like going to be so great because they're like, you plant them once, they're so easy, but the weeds are such a challenge with them, and it's hard to prioritize them too in the growing season, just because there's so much else going on. And maybe these perennials aren't even going to give you any money this year or next year, like with the asparagus, So it's like, if it's not even a crop that you're selling, it's really hard to make time for it. And then it just gets so out of control that I at least just don't even, I try not to even look at it because it just stresses me out, and then it makes it worse. So yeah, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's hard. Yeah. I don't have a good answer to that, except I think cleaning them out really well and giving them more mulch than you could possibly think is appropriate. That's what I'm going to try to do next season. And I don't know, I guess I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah. Keep us updated on that. I mean, the asparagus one's interesting because it is, like you said, it's a crop that takes 3 or 4 years before you're really even allowed to start harvesting it. And especially in our climate, like even if you're going to put a bunch of mulch on top of it, the elements and the microbes are going to kind of consume that mulch pretty fast. So you really got to do that every year to keep the weeds down.
Every year, definitely every year.
Yeah, that's tough. Yeah. Yep. There's one more kind of big crop that you do that I want to dive into a little bit here. Is you do a lot of edible flowers. So I'm kind of wondering if you could talk about some of your favorites of those edible flowers and some tips for managing them.
Sure. I think number one, before we get into anything about edible flowers, the most important thing if you're growing edible flowers is that you're very discerning in what you're selling and what you're culling. Edible flowers and flowers in general have such a short lifespan before they start to deteriorate, and they're so delicate that, I mean, in the peak of the season and for the individual flower, we're either picking them every single day, including weekends, or we're deadheading them every single day if we're not able to sell what's on there. So it's ridiculously labor intensive, but the flip side is that they're by far the most profitable crop per square foot that we grow, like by so much. I don't have an exact figure, but like, let's say this year we did probably not more than 500 square feet of edible flowers, and we're somewhere in the $25,000 of edible flower sales, or $30,000 in edible flower sales this year. So that's, I don't know what's the math there, but it's pretty clear that no other crop can really compete like that. But no one wants to spend $20 on a quart of edible flowers to have any amount of them be mushy or start to deteriorate, oh, even just after a couple days. And so like borage is a big one that we grow, and probably like one of the most delicate edible flowers that we grow. And people are always saying like, wow, I can't believe your borage lasts so long. All the other borage that we get, only lasts for like 2 or 3 days, but ours will last for like a week. And that's because of just how we handle them, and also how we treat the soil. So flowers like a lot of potassium, and we found that really helps to boost blooms, and also to like give them some sort of like quote unquote hardiness. Like it just makes them more tough, so that they have like a longer shelf life. But everyone that picks flowers here, it's kind of hard to train someone. They need to have the eye of like, this is good, this is bad. And then the people that I try to show that to that can't get it, just they don't pick edible flowers. It's just too much of a risk, because they're so expensive that if they end up not looking that good, then you're just going to lose that account from buying your flowers, because they're going to be like, the quality is just uneven. And so it's not worth it to me as a chef to spend, X amount of money per week on flowers if I don't know they're always going to be really top quality. So that's a huge, huge focus for us. And
maybe take us through the borage, like, because that's a slightly more delicate one. So what is that? Are you picking them super early in the morning, or like, what is the whole procedure? You pick them, you put them directly into pints and quarts, and then they go into the cooler?
Yeah, we do all of our flowers first thing, and we pick them directly into containers. We don't wash them. So that's why generally we have them all under cover, so that they don't get beaten up by rain, or they don't get like dirty, basically. And for the borage, we're not ever touching the actual flower. We're picking it from the stem of the calyx and right into quart containers. I counted once, because it was like I was in like some sort of borage hell one weekend morning, and I was like, how many borage flowers are in a quart container? We sell the quart container of borage for $30, but there's between 500 and 600 flowers in a quart. So really labor intensive, but if you can pull it off, borage, we probably did $5,000 in borage this year. So it's worth it if you can pull it off. But with borage, it's important never to touch the petals, because once you do, no matter what, it's going to oxidize, and either it'll have a crack in the petal that'll oxidize, or it'll just kind of be smushed and oxidized. So that's one of the trickiest flowers we grow. Probably the most forgiving is marigolds. They're super tough. Their quality lasts a very long time on the plant, and they're really hard to bruise or otherwise mess up. And they're very long standing. They have a long season. We're actually still picking marigolds that we planted in May. So even though they're in the greenhouse, so they're getting some heat at night, but even though the sun is very low at this point and weak, they're still putting out flowers, which is really quite amazing. Another one is nasturtium. We grow like one bed in the greenhouse, like 40 feet of nasturtiums, climbing variety. And those will keep going, especially if you're top dressing them a few times throughout the season with potassium and maybe a little bit of nitrogen too. And we did about over 600 quart-sized clamshells of nasturtiums from that 40-foot greenhouse bed. So that's like we did about $6,600 just from one greenhouse bed of nasturtiums. Started picking in April, and we're cleaning them out today. So it's pretty reliable. And then there's some that are like very ephemeral and like only crop for a few weeks, but they're so cool and beautiful that it's always like people get excited about them, because it's like they have like a real season. And one of them is Nigella. I think it's just one of the most complex and intricate and interesting flowers out there. But it doesn't like the heat very much. And since we end up going generally from winter to summer, without a very long spring, we only probably get to pick them for about a month. But, they're so cool that it's kind of worth giving them a little bit of space. Bachelor buttons can crop for a longer period of time, probably can crop for maybe 2.5, 3 months, but they need to be deadheaded if you're not picking them, or else they'll just completely shut down and die. So, I mean, when we have a lot of flowers going, which is really like May, June, and the first half of July, we're spending a lot of time deadheading because they're just putting out blooms so fast that we can't sell all those blooms. But the tricky thing is if we planted less of them, then the shoulders part of the seasons, like the beginning and the end of those seasons, there wouldn't be enough flowers for everyone. So it's like we do need to grow a little bit more so that we have more sales, basically. But that also means that we have an oversupply for the main part of the flower season, and therefore there's a good amount of deadheading that has to happen as a result.
Yeah, that's so interesting. The borage one is I planted probably like 20 feet of borage one year, and it was just so much. And
that's a lot.
I guess I didn't realize like how productive those plants were. I was just like, oh, I've got a little space, I'll throw it here. And one thing I noticed that it definitely reseeded quite easily. Which is another reason that you're also having to deadhead, I would assume, right?
Yeah. It's like everything's going to just reseed. Even if you're deadheading, you're just not going to get them all. So we have a lot of, we have bachelor buttons coming up, marigolds popping up, borage certainly popping up. But for some things, like with the borage, we almost kind of have an area for it. And then it's like always that area, because it'll germinate when the conditions are right for it to germinate. And, in terms of like the weather cools down kind of thing, the light gets a little bit intense. And so it's kind of like, you remove the crop, you might plant something else in there, amend the soil, and then it'll come back and you'll kind of like just have that as a kind of roughly permanent area for borage. So that we kind of use that for, we let the self-seeding kind of be to our advantage when we can, but, it generally doesn't really work out that way. So yeah, we're definitely cultivating out flower seedlings from other crops for sure.
Are there other crops beyond the radicchio and the edible flowers that have really been good income generators for you?
Yeah, so crops that are generally really good income generators for me have a pretty long season, because then we can get, multiple harvests from them. And when a long season crop also coincides with a moderately or very high value crop, that's like the best combination. So New Zealand spinach or tetragonia is like a really big one that fits those bills. It's a spinach alternative that's like succulent, very attractive, and very long standing, no disease or very little disease and insect pressure. And so we sell that for $16 a pound and get to harvest it for, I don't know, maybe 8 months or something. So that's a good example of that. And then there's, a crop called agretti, which is like another succulent. I found that chefs really love succulent. So the more succulents you can grow, the better, at least for me. And this doesn't have quite as long of a season, but if you get a few successions in, then you can push it to probably 10 to 12 weeks. But at $32 a pound, and succulents being quite heavy, that's we did like $6,000 in agretti just in a few months. So that was really awesome. But I gotta say, I never grew tomatoes when I was on 8,000 square feet, at least for sale. I grew them for myself, but not for sale. And tomatoes have become number one for us. So it's like we still grow normal crops that everyone else grows, that everyone else makes a lot of their money on too.
That's it. Okay, so a couple things. The tetragonia, when you said you're harvesting that for 8 months, you're harvesting off the same plot for 8 months, like the same planting?
Correct.
Yeah, that's amazing. Tetragonia is delicious too.
Yeah, and it just keeps going. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's a cool crop. That's one that I'd be more interested in growing, I think. What with the tomatoes, are you specializing in specific varieties, or are your chefs just kind of like, bring me some red tomatoes? Like, how does that work out?
Yeah, so I think if I was to say we specialize in one variety, it would be specializing in oxheart type varieties, which are very meaty, very dense, very few seeds, medium to low acid, very thin skin, and quite productive too. So we grow probably, I don't know, maybe 50% or a little bit more is just oxhearts, a few different varieties. And then the other 50% kind of just fills out the diversity. So we do kind of switch it up here and there, trying to find like varieties that I really like. But we do like an heirloom, just round orange type that's really just delicious, called Nebraska Wedding. We do a couple like hybrid cherries that you can pick whole truss, because I love how that looks, and also it's less labor intensive than picking cherry tomatoes individually, but probably not as profitable, because we sell all the tomatoes kind of mixed for $4 a pound, so we don't differentiate like pricing for cherries. But the labor savings on just picking whole truss, and the whole truss, can be generally like half a pound, so it's like $2 per truss. It's pretty decent, but probably could make more money on those. But we just lump everything together at $4 a pound, because it kind of then, gives us all of our bigger tomatoes being worth probably an extra $1.50 per pound. And then we do, like maybe one striped variety a year. I've been growing trying out these, kind of like, what do you call them? Hybrid heirlooms, and trying to find ones that I think are good. And I found I think Margold is pretty good, but I grew some other ones I didn't love as much. So I'm interested in those, just for vigor, disease resistance, etc. But I found that the oxhearts, in terms of production, I mean, they're better than a lot of those hybrid heirlooms. I don't grow any like hybrid greenhouse, like just red slicer types. So I can't really speak to those, but I think the people that do grow them really love them, because they're just so ridiculously productive. And even if they're dropping the price a little bit, they're still making way more money than they are on the heirlooms. But for me, there's just no market for an ordinary tomato for me, in terms of just everyone else that in town that's growing tomatoes in the summer. And just the fact that chefs want really delicious, flavorful tomatoes that aren't particularly ordinary, let's say, that I can't make those happen for my market. But I know a few people that, just had insane yields. I think it was with the one of the BHNs, like one of the new ones from Johnny's, but like just epic, humongous tomatoes, and they're able to sell them for like $3 a pound. So that's pretty awesome. But they're selling at markets,
Yeah, those BHNs are great. Well, Evan Chendar, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, it was really an honor and a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, if you enjoyed that episode, make sure to follow The Culinary Gardener on Instagram, and I will hook it up with some links in the show notes. Also, subscribe to this podcast wherever you are getting it. We would love to see you all in San Diego, so go check out that event at no-tillgrowers.com/events. So excited about that. That's going to be super fun. I'm also excited about the beers that we're going to have afterward. come hang out. It'll be awesome. Consider signing up to be a patron at patreon.com/farmerjesse, or like I said, you can always kick us a few bucks on Venmo at No-Till Growers, just to say I liked the show. We really appreciate that. Or if you're more of a check person, email me at notillgrowers.com and I can give you an address. Anyway, thank you to Josh Satin and Jackson Roulette for all of your work. Thank you, as always, to my wife, Hannah, without whom this podcast would definitely not be possible. And, of course, thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye. There's a place that sells OMRI-approved compost near us, and it's okay. I actually found recently a place that does leaf mold compost for cheaper. It's $15 a yard. It doesn't have any animal manure in it, so we can use it because we're certified. And so we're going to trial that a little bit this year and see if that's a better option, because the stuff we've been getting is like closer to $30 a yard, and it's just hard to justify.
And it's like, is it pretty woody, or is it like a nice finished product?
It's pretty woody. It's really hard to directly seed into.
That's what I've had a challenge with too. It's just like, I don't know. I see different places on Instagram like that are like, there's this one farm in Nova Scotia, Canada, and they're like, yeah, I just got like another like 20 yards or 40 yards of like beautiful compost that's like, you know, full of like seaweed and like all like lobster shells, you know, like I'm like, holy crap. And it's like the same price. It's like $30 a yard, you know? So it's just crazy how much like where you live like affects like access to stuff like that and access to quality.